Hey there, my name is Bernadette Smith. Welcome to 5 Things in 15 Minutes, my weekly show where I bring good vibes to DEI. That is good vibes to diversity, equity, and inclusion with a little dash of corporate social responsibility. What I've found is that there are lots of news stories about what's going wrong in the world and lots of negative data, but there are also a lot of things going right. That's what I like to focus on. I search for DEI stories that we can be inspired by and learn from. My hope is to inspire you to experiment with some of these inclusive actions and policies within your own organization to help you build a more inclusive world. In this week's episode, I'm joined by Jennifer Brown, founder of Jennifer Brown Consulting, keynote speaker, and best-selling author of How to Be an Inclusive Leader. This week, our conversation is about company benefits for reproductive travel, how hiring refugees is good for business, and more. Let's get started. Jennifer, will you please introduce yourself?
Great. Thank you, Bernadette. I'm Jennifer. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I've been in this work a long time. So, I think we need to back up and say, the ebbs and flows of change are never easy to navigate, but they certainly make us better practitioners, especially the challenging times.
Yeah, thank you for saying that to get us started because I was going to ask you about that. We see things like the Supreme Court overturning affirmative
Mhm.
action, companies being sued for their DEI programs. I mean, it's just kind of a mess out there. What are some of the things that you're hearing from your clients, or some of the challenges you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, we're in the midst of a big retrenchment and a lot of fear on the part of advocates, both personal individuals, a lot of us that are doing this work, but also on the part, I think, of institutions and leadership. It's not a moment of courage in many cases. I think the courage that we wish we would have seen as the challenges rolled through. But it's a hard reminder that the bottom line kind of wins out, and that business is business at the end of the day. So I think we have to get really savvy with how we implement change, and be really practical. And I think in some cases, kind of going back to basics, Bernadette, it's really interesting. I think in hindsight, we really sprinted forward the last couple of years and assumed that so many were along the ride with us, and that momentum would just continue. And of course, for every action, there's a reaction. And, with the benefit of hindsight, we could see that we would need to perhaps go back to go forward because we accelerated so intensely. And, we were all very excited to, be a part of that acceleration. But I think we should have expected this time to go back and say, so who did we leave behind? What did we not address? Where were we not inclusive in perhaps the way that would have brought people along, that now have kind of, unfortunately polarized to become, the resistance to these concepts that we know are so good for all of us. So we have to, I think, look inward and say, where perhaps did we miscalibrate, and really get better at what we do. And I think more inclusive with our strategies, ironically enough.
Yeah, well, I think that's I love your podcast. And one of the things you always talk about on your podcast is that everybody has a diversity story, right? And I think that in the past couple of years, it was pretty easy to forget that everybody has a diversity story. And I think that there were people who felt left out.
Yeah.
And, even people of, even when I think, as we've talked about before, your own people with privilege need it.
Mhm.
They obviously have a seat at the table, but they need to feel included in the conversation in a way that they're not dismissed, right?
Right.
And that's your secret sauce in the
It
work that you
is.
do.
It is. I try to hold space for that. But you're right, Bernadette. That's why I keep trying to broaden the definition of diversity, because we have so many identities, both visible and invisible. We also have identities of privilege and advantage, depending on the system that we're in. Some systems privilege some of us and some do not. And
Mhm.
depends on, who we are in that system and how we're regarded in that system traditionally. So there's always something I think we can do to be both the ally, and utilize the privilege, which is the definition of allyship, I think, to uplift others, break through barriers. But there's also other times that we need the allyship. As an LGBTQ plus person, you and I, we know the power of that and how transformative it can be.
Mhm.
So my message these days is, let's not weaponize the P word. Let's really just talk about it as something that is just something that we all carry. We all carry different forms of it, and depends on the day and the situation. But I think every moment, our job really is to notice the system that is in play. Are we an insider or an outsider in that system, or somewhere in between? And how do we want to interact with that system? What do we want to bring as a change agent? We may be bringing our voice as somebody who's been traditionally marginalized, and we may be bringing our insider status to raise attention around something, shine a light on something, have a courageous conversation. So I think if we could all of us could look at the ingredients of who we are in this way, I think we would be more useful. And the challengers from the inside are super important at this moment, because that's, I think, where this tussle is going on, this for the soul and the spirit of equity and equality. I mean, that's where it's happening. So, the power, the rooms with people with quote unquote institutional power, defined power in that way, that's where some serious honesty and advocacy could go a long way to impacting thousands of people around the world. I mean, decisions get made there that ripple out widely. So I think we have to figure out, what are those conversations? What's happening in those conversations? How comfortable are people advocating? There's a lot of awkwardness, a lot of fear, a lot of, I'm going to say the wrong thing, a lot of, I don't want to break with the group, and I don't want to kick the system that benefits me. And so there's a lot of, again, a lot of that binary thinking around win-lose. And I don't think it's that. I actually think there's something additive here that we can accomplish.
Well, I love how you basically described a framework, starting with the question, am I an insider or outsider? So I hope that you have that framework as a one-pager or PDF that someone can download, because folks listening on the podcast, rewind and write that down, because it really was a very simple way for folks to sort of think about, how do I fit into all of this, and to find their space. So thank you for sharing that with all of us. So in this week's 5 Things newsletter, I wrote about a previous guest on the show called Celia Daniels. And when she was on the show introducing herself, she happens to be a South Asian trans woman, but she also mentioned that she loves music. She has a 25-year-old daughter, and she started talking about her other passions and how her trans identity is only one small part of her whole self. And I think, and I certainly am starting to feel that way more and more about my queer identity. And I just think that with places like the International Chess Federation banning trans women this week kind of reduce us to just these singular parts of who we are. And we need to get back to finding our common humanity. And I really think the framework that you laid out actually gives folks a tool to do that.
Thank you. I feel inspired now. Thank you.
My brain works in lead magnets sometimes. And
I love that. I love it.
Okay, let's move into this week's Good Vibes. The first story is about the trans handyman, a DIY fix-it influencer on TikTok named Mercury Stardust. She has gained over 2 million followers, has a new book out, and is just, I watched some of the videos, and she is just a breath of fresh air. Absolutely amazing. Did you get to check out Mercury, Jennifer?
No, but how cool. Got to see it to be it. So just the role modeling is so powerful there. Also, just the embracing of the full identity publicly. I'm in awe as a Gen Xer, particularly. I'm not sure what generational cohort they're from, but it is so inspirational to challenge myself to watch the full embracing and authenticity of identity that is happening amongst younger generations. And so I don't know, actually, I shouldn't assume the age cohort, but it's just, to me, these are huge differences between the generations, like in the LGBTQ community, the way we speak about our identity, the way we incorporate it, the way we insist on it.
Yes.
Is so beautiful. And the assumption that I think we need to believe, which is there's so many people that need to see somebody like this and feel I could do that. I could be that. And, I'm super inspired. And our generation is I think still wrestles a lot with the closet around identity. I mean, I think the last statistic from HRC is half of us are still closeted in our professional lives, and that is inconceivable
It
to
is.
the up and coming generation. So it's really, really exciting.
It is. And one of the things that she said about all the people that are writing in or commenting in to ask for advice is that their common theme is that these are people who don't have anyone else to ask advice from,
Wow.
and I just think that filling that void as well. And it just kind of makes me sad that we don't like to make ourselves vulnerable enough to ask for help. And so I think that there's a bigger piece that's
Mhm.
being played here as well. So anyway, a
Oh,
big new
um,
fan of
oh,
Mercury
I'll have to check
Stardust.
them out. And the book bans are so sad for that exact reason. It's sort of like you assume you're alone just because we humans, I think, when we feel different, we immediately sort of isolate and
Yeah.
assume that nobody shares our identity. So, to be depriving people of the ability to see, I mean, thank goodness for social media in this respect, right? I mean, there's a lot of problems with it, but it has revolutionized the coming out process and also the gender identity conversation, expression. I mean, it's
Yeah.
literally, it is a whole world that I didn't have.
And me either.
um, I didn't even know that was possible. So that is so important to protect.
Yeah, absolutely. All
Yeah.
right. The second story this week comes from the Peggy Guggenheim collection in Venice, which has a new double meaning program that offers inclusive tours for blind, partially sighted, and sighted visitors. That includes
Mhm.
tactile reproductions of artwork along with descriptive sheets in braille and high legibility characters. I love this.
So incredible. We've gone through a lot of our materials and as a company, like been trying to educate ourselves about how to colors to use, fonts to utilize or not utilize, spacing, content, even, paying attention to neurodiversities, both, on our team and also in our audiences to give information in a variety of ways so that we, not just those of us who are neurodiverse, but honestly, all kinds of learners, we take in information differently. And,
Right.
I foresee a day when this is going to be a new best practice, what they're doing, and a requirement. And I look forward to that day. But I admit fully that there's so much I don't know, and I try to be really transparent about that to normalize the fact that we are learning, we are all learning, and remember that a third of us will have a disability at some point in our lifetimes as well. So remembering this is a part of us already. It's a part of our world, part of our team, whether we know it or not. The fear and the stigma around disclosure of identity is really what gets in the way, particularly in the workforce. And in Bernadette, it's a lot like LGBTQ
Yeah.
identity. In fact, they share a lot in common. The stigma is still strong, and the fear of retaliation and lost opportunity is very real. So we have a hard time even just counting the folks with disabilities in the modern workforce because of that fear on the employee engagement surveys and HR data collection processes. So it's hard to, again, to our earlier point, standing up and being counted is actually part of the change. But we are acknowledging there's a lot of risk to doing that, depending on who you work for, where you work in the world, how mature your organization is, how mature your manager is. Because
Yeah.
honestly, it comes down to that manager holding the keys to your opportunities, your exposure, your future. And it shouldn't be that way, but it is.
It is.
And so my wish is, boy, I think this is a call to action to really diversify beyond your direct boss, like your network. Make sure that you're constantly creating relationships with as many people as possible, so that it's not up to one person's bias or lack
Yeah.
of self-awareness, and they hold your future in their hands. It's very important to diversify that support team, your sort of personal board of directors, if you will.
Great career advice. Really great career advice. And I'll have to say, I am privileged to not need this. And
Mhm.
that can change in an instant. And
That's right.
so, one more reason that I'm grateful that this exists.
Mm.
Okay. The third story this week is from historic furniture manufacturer Stickley, which has been actively hiring refugees in the company's 1,600 person workforce in New York, constituting 50% of the company, 23 nationalities. and great employee retention. I mean, they're just checking a lot of boxes. This is something that Chobani does actively as well. And I just think it's so smart,
That's
so
beautiful.
helpful.
You talk about an incentive to, I mean, I literally shift the way I look at my purchasing decisions, with furniture.
Yeah,
I mean, you've told me all I
exactly.
need to know. Um, you know,
Exactly.
right? And it used to be, we have a lot of brands failing the LGBTQ community, some of which I will not mention, that we have really believed in for a long time and put a lot of stock in, right? In the same
Yeah.
way. So what I love about this story is that, again, we can kind of open our aperture as a community. And it used to be only, oh, well, who's LGBTQ plus community friendly?
Hmm.
But this story around what they're doing for refugees and looking at their workforce, and same with the formerly incarcerated, is another enormous
Yeah.
talent pool that has a very difficult time getting hired, that shouldn't. So
Right.
much talent, so much diversity.
Yep.
Literally, it's like every time I hear somebody say, "Oh, we have a pipeline problem and we can't find the diverse talent," it's
Yeah.
like there's this whole extremely motivated and loyal workforce possible, and yet we cannot figure out a way to change our HR system so that people don't get screened out automatically
Yeah.
because of that one detail. So I love this. I don't know about you, but that just gave me, gave
Yeah.
me a direction for my spending. And honestly, that's it's not why businesses do it, I hope, but it is a huge benefit to them doing it. And I think we need to paying attention to all of these sometimes unheralded moves. Like sometimes we don't even know about stories like this, which is, and it's
Hmm.
going on behind the scenes because a brand is very humble about it, or it's just how they roll.
Yeah.
So too, I think we need to be looking, on the hunt for those that don't crow about it, that are doing really amazing, innovative things.
Well, if anyone listening or watching works for one of those brands, a little less or a little more humble, please, and has something really cool to
Yeah.
share, I would love to talk about it here on Five Things, because I mean, it's easy to find the headlines, but sometimes some of these more obscure stories, it requires a hunt for me. So
I'm sure.
next story is about the increase in interest in job postings by companies offering abortion related travel reimbursement and benefits. So these are companies that are seeing more people apply, despite the fact that there are some ratings for senior management and company culture that have dropped. So, I think that what we see here with this type of data is that extending reproductive benefits can really attract a more diverse workforce.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it reminds me of, as a company treats sort of one community, it often tends to have sort of an ethos of
Mhm.
really, walking the talk. And
Right.
I think this speaks to not just literally do I get those health care services if I work for this company? It speaks to the values overall of the company, the commitments that it holds to, like, protecting, if you will, employees of all identities.
Yeah.
And they will do so imperfectly. I'm not saying that it's ever perfect. It never is. But I think that friendly companies on this issue have probably a lot of equity already earned and in the bank, and many years of working, because you don't just come at this kind of benefit lightly.
Yeah.
This is something that is very controversial to even provide. So
Yes.
the thing I would imagine that's happened internally is these are either really easy decisions because everyone's been at the work for a long time, and it's like, well, of course we would do that. Why wouldn't we?
Mhm.
And the smart ones are using it to differentiate themselves, because it's
Right.
still a war for talent. It's still a tight market.
Yeah.
Um, but they're willing to put themselves in the crosshairs. And again, Bernadette, it kind of think it's like these new issues. I've been so focused on LGBTQ plus friendly brands, and they've come and gone. But to me, a company that offers something like this is sort of equally impressive to me, and it's something that, like, rises to my attention. And the assumption is, this is probably a progressive organization that's going to do very well with the workforce coming in, because inclusion is one of the top values of not just millennial, but Gen Z, the oldest of whom are 27, 28.
Yeah.
So if you think about, they know their demographic, I'm sure too.
Mhm.
All this is very strategic and savvy, but I do think it's probably safe to say if we looked under the hood, we would find a lot of really good work happening at companies that offer this proactively and talk about it. And good for them. And may they flourish and get the best and
Yes.
brightest talent. They deserve it.
Absolutely. I completely agree. Okay, the last story this week comes from the Philadelphia Eagles in the National Football League, which is collaborating with Popcorn for the People to build a popcorn concession stand that will employ adults with autism and those who have intellectual disabilities. So, about 85% of individuals on the autism spectrum are unemployed. So, this is aiming to close that gap just a little bit in Philadelphia.
Excellent.
Nice
Love it.
story. Yeah. I
Really,
mean,
really good. Feel good story, like real impact. Back to our point about all kinds of neurodiversities. I just literally every day I feel like I speak to somebody, I'm catching up with somebody, and they say, "Oh, I just was diagnosed."
mm,
So it's really interesting to imagine how widespread actually neurodiversity is,
yeah.
unbeknownst to organizations in their current workforce, let alone a hiring strategy that prioritizes that. But, for everyone listening here, if you don't know the ways in which you can create a neurodiverse friendly recruitment process, interviewing process, resumes, interviewing skills for managers, and then onboarding, and then all the way towards retention of employees, which would include affinity group investments in particular efforts, not just to recruit, but you must retain as well. But there are very sophisticated efforts going on at like Microsoft and Dell. Tends to be a lot of the tech companies, at least that I know of.
Yep.
But
Procter and Gamble too.
yeah, so it's a movement, and
Yeah.
it's really exciting to see. And there's people with disabilities, founders and business owners and entrepreneurs getting certified as a disability owned firm, just like
Mhm.
I'm certified LGBT and woman owned.
Yep.
So, this is a thing that's happening. It's here. I won't even say it's coming. It's here. But I think again, the companies that really like lean into this are going to benefit both, to keeping the best people, getting the best people, and then enabling people to do their best work, and really bettering the whole culture, because we can learn a lot from the conversation about how do I learn? How do I take information in? How are meetings effective for me? What do I need to be successful? What accommodations do I need? Those are all helpful for all of us. It's called universal design. It
Mhm.
means that, does something designed for someone for whom the system doesn't work actually improves our experience of the system across the board. And so we should be leaning into this heavy and saying, okay, what can this teach us about how we need to change our structures? So
I
good
great
news.
great advice, and as more companies start to embrace neurodiversity, you can bet I'll be writing about it in 5 things. So thank you so much for joining me today, Jennifer. Can you tell folks how they can get in touch with you? How they can
Absolutely.
follow
Thanks for
you?
having me. This was so fun. I love this format.
Thank you.
I'm at Jennifer Brown Consulting or jenniferbrownspeaks.com. On LinkedIn, you'll find me. I'm at Jennifer Brown Speaks on Instagram, on X, I suppose. Do I say that? Ugh, at Jennifer Brown. And yes, absolutely engage with us and join our mailing list. We do a lot of really neat programs on some of the topics we talked about today. And we consult to companies to build their strategy and their affinity groups and ERGs. And I speak and write books. And I love that as an ex-performer. The stage is my home. So I get to work within my passions and my competencies or incompetencies.
Yeah.
We're always learning every day. So thanks, Bernadette.
Absolutely. Thank you. And folks, check out Jennifer's podcast as well, The Will to Change. And also, another call to action is another podcast recommendation called Fixable, hosted by my Shiro's spouses and leadership experts, Ann Morris and Francis Fry. And by the way, speaking of that, Jennifer, you're one of my Shiros as well. And I just have so
Aw,
much respect and admiration for you. And so it's really a delight to have you on the show. So thank you
thank
very
you.
much.
Thanks, Bernadette.
Yeah, and folks who don't already get the 5 Things newsletter, you can subscribe at 5thingsdei.com. Thanks and have a great week.